Hello everyone, welcome to another learning episode. Today I'm going to share how I wrote my qualitative research. Last 2018, I wrote a qualitative research titled Inclusive Senior High School Classroom with Students with Hearing Impairment. I got really fascinated with the idea of inclusivity since the Department of Education instills the importance of inclusive education among schools. Inclusivity means the acceptance of each and every student regardless of their ability, disabilities, race, religion, since we all believe that education is for all and one of the basic rights of human being is the right to education. This qualitative research titled Inclusive Senior High School Classroom with Students with Hearing Impairment is phenomenological in nature. When we talk about phenomenological research's purpose, these are to seek reality from individuals' narratives of their experiences and feelings and to produce in-depth descriptions of the phenomenon. This is according to Yüksel and Yildirim, year 2015. Since the purpose of these qualitative research is to learn more about the experiences, the situation, feelings of the conversation partners or the respondents, I have to use interviews and focus group discussions to probe and to dig into the deeper analysis of the situation. Now, what is qualitative research? Qualitative research is different from quantitative research. First is quantitative research is numerical. However, qualitative research is non-numerical, meaning the data analysis is descriptive. Everything is put into written analysis. However, with quantitative, the data analysis or the results will be placed into numerical value. Another thing about qualitative research is it is inductive. When we talk about inductive, we should start from the middle, meaning we should start with our data methodology, data analysis, and data explication. We have to look into the results first before writing our introduction and review of related literature. What is the reason behind why we have to start with our data analysis? We need to start with our data analysis first before writing the introduction and related literature. It's for the researchers and the participants to avoid biases and avoid leading the participants to what has already been discovered about the study. So this is very important knowledge when we are working on our qualitative research. Now, after I gave you the necessary basic knowledge about qualitative research, I'm gonna share to you now the processes that I did in order for me to analyze all the data gathered from the conversation partners that I had. First thing that I did was I set an overarching question or a research objective. When we talk about overarching question, it means this is the general question that we have to answer from our qualitative research. So this is an example of an overarching question from the qualitative research that I had. My overarching question was, what are the experiences of English teachers and students with hearing impairment in inclusive senior high school classrooms? So from the general question, I already had the purpose of my study. So what is the main purpose of my study? It was to identify the experiences that the English teachers and students with hearing impairment had when they were in an inclusive senior high school classroom setup. Aside from it, my overarching question also had the two participants that I needed to work on. So these participants were the group of English teachers and the group of students with hearing impairment. After I identify the overarching question or the general research objective for my manuscript, I then prepared a set of questions for my interview guide. With quantitative, the one that we are using in quantitative is survey questionnaires or assessment questionnaire or research instrument tools in which our respondents would answer objectively from these surveys. While with qualitative research, it's very different because we have to dig deeper. We have to establish a relationship with our conversation partners. And one research instrument that we have to use is an interview. So before we could have an interview with the conversation partners that we have, we need to prepare a set of questions first. What I did in my qualitative research, since I have two groups of conversation partners, the English teachers and the students with hearing impairment, I prepared 10 set of questions for each group. These questions were quite identical, but they are not ultimately the same because I had to look into the personal experiences of these two different groups. So these are the sample questions that I had. with the English teachers. These are 4 out of 10. First question was, what are your experiences in handling inclusive classes? Do you find it burdensome? Why? Number 2, how do you treat your students with hearing impairment? Do you have special tasks for them? What are those? Number 3, what kind of activities do you implement in the classroom? Number 4, what is the relationship of the students with hearing impairment with the regular classmates? As you noticed, I haven't asked here only yes or no question or questions with objective answers. The questions that I had here were all open-ended questions. Though I made use of yes or no question, but after this yes or no question, I always ask why or why not in order for them to respond in an open-ended statements. Why is it important for us to get an open-ended responses when we are talking or when we are dealing a qualitative research? It's for us to have a rich data to analyze. So these are the set of questions I had naman with the students with hearing impairment. Interviewing the students with hearing impairment was quite challenging because though I know basic sign language, but I'm not really that fluent in terms of sign language. So I had to ask 2 interpreters to help me out. What I did, I just throw the question and let the interpreters do the sign language. So these are the 3 sample questions that I had with them. First, how does it feel being part of an inclusive classroom? Do you find it hard to be in an inclusive setup together with your regular classmates? Followed by a question why or why not. Number 2, how does your teacher treat you in class? Does he or she give you a special task to do or take you as a normal student? What are these special tasks? Number 3, how is your relationship with your classmates? Do you sometimes get teased or bullied by your classmates? So these 3 were the important questions that I had. I still had 7 questions, but I no longer share it here. As you notice, the questions that I had with the teachers and the questions that I had with the hearing impaired students were somewhat identical because I have to check the consistency of their answers. So right after I crafted 10 set of questions for each of the conversation partner that I had, I then set an inclusion criteria. What is an inclusion criteria? These are the qualifications I set in order for me to identify that these are the conversation partners that I need to have. So here's an example of the inclusion criteria that I had. For teacher conversation partners, they were the ones who are teaching inclusive senior high school classes with students with hearing impairment. And these teachers may or may not have special education training. As long as they are teaching an inclusive senior high school classes, or as long as they are teaching an inclusive senior high school class, they will be qualified as one of my respondents. And this inclusive senior high school class must have students with hearing impairment. While on the other group of conversation partner, the students with hearing impairment, these students with hearing impairment must be enrolled in a regular class together with the hearing group. In this way, they could be part of the study. Once I already fixed the inclusion criteria for my study, I then worked on my data explication, data gathering, and data methodology. The research instruments that I used were interview guide questions, particularly a semi-structured interview. What is a semi-structured interview? It's different from a structured interview because with structured interview, you have to follow every detail of your guide question. However, with semi-structured interview, you can just pop up an impromptu question. Example, your conversation partner has shared a certain interesting story and you want to ask a follow-up question from that which is not related to the guide question that you prepare. So you can just have an ad-lib question or an impromptu question in order to scrutinize the detail of the story. The research instrument that I used were series of interviews and focus group discussion. The difference between an interview and focus group discussion, the interview, I need to do it one-on-one. While focus group discussion, I have to gather all my conversation partners in one place and interview them. This is a very interesting setup because during an interview with a group of conversation partners that you have, there will be stories that will be shared by an individual or a conversation partner that the other conversation partner could relate to. This way, and you can saturate the data, you can gather a richer responses coming from the group. Then the research tools that I used were camera, recorder, field note, and pen. Why is it important for us to still bring a field note and a pen even if we already have a camera and recorder? Well, a researcher should have a pen and a notebook because he or she has to record everything that he is observing while doing the interview. Then, after the interview and the focus group discussion, what I did is to transcribe everything. Meaning I already went to the transcription part. The words spoken by the conversation partners or the responses from the interviews that we had were transformed into written text to be studied and analyzed. So I listened to the audio recording, to the recording of our interviews. I listened intently and put everything into written form so I could study it and analyze. So this is one example of the transcription that I had. TCP stands for Teacher Conversation Partner Number 1. I need to put a screen name for each of the conversation partner that I had because it's one of the protocol, it's one of our research ethics, which is to protect the identity of our conversation partner, since this is the information that they will be giving is very confidential and we need to protect the anonymity of these identities. So this is an example of the transcription that I had. Once we are transcribing, we have to put it in a verbatim manner, meaning we have to write everything that they have said. These words were coming from the conversation partner number 1. So let me read to you what he or she has answered from the first question that I asked him or her, which was, do you find teaching inclusive senior high school classroom burdensome? Why? And this is the conversation partner number 1's response. Not at all. Instead, I find it challenging, the fact that I will be having students who are considered special. As a teacher, of course, it is natural to feel frustration and fear at first. I used to think that I wouldn't be able to feed the hearing impaired students comprehensive lessons just like the normal ones. However, it's nice that in our school, they have with them interpreters sponsored by the local government unit to help cope with the lessons. This is the transcription part where we have to write every word that came out of the mouth of each conversation partner. So the reason why I put number to some certain phrases and word in this response because these are the responses that have meaning. How do you classify if a response has a meaning? First, you need to go back to our overarching question, which was, what are the experiences of the English teachers and students with hearing impairment? If this response answered to our purpose, which is to cite the experiences of these conversation partners, then we need to consider this as one unit of meaning. Here in this response, there are 6 units of meaning, meaning these words, these phrases, these clauses, or these sentences answered our overarching question, which was to identify the experiences of the English teacher handling an inclusive senior high school classroom. And after getting all the number of units of relevant meaning from the responses of our conversation partners, we then need to scrutinize the relevant meanings. These relevant meanings must be connected again to the overarching question or research objectives, because these units of relevant meanings will be our basis in forming themes. Because with qualitative research, we have to form themes basing from the stories, basing from the experiences of the conversation partners. So these are the units of relevant meaning. These are coming from the responses of our 6 conversation partners. So the experience that they had with inclusive senior high school classroom was challenging, natural to feel frustration, they feel fear. So these are responses that these are responses that have meaning, and these are responses that are related to our overarching question, which was primarily to seek the experiences of our English teachers and the students with hearing impairment. So those words which are no longer related about their experiences with inclusivity will be omitted or will be deleted. At this point, the next process after selecting all the relevant meanings related to the overarching question was delineating units of meaning relevant to the research question. The narratives of the conversation partners must be clustered into common essences. So the next thing that you have to do is clustering all the responses that have similar meaning. Example, this one. This response, inclusivity sharpens professionalism according to one of the teachers. Second, It helps one to think thoroughly about the delivery of the subject matter. Third, a teacher also exerts extra effort for lesson planning and material preparation. The researcher will then think of a theme in which these three responses could be classified into one cluster. Now let's go here to the second sample of clustering responses coming from the different conversation partners. So here we have 4 responses coming from the teachers. One of the teachers said that he couldn't feed comprehensive lessons to the students with hearing impairment. Another teacher also said that he couldn't assess if they have learned the lesson of the day or not. One third response was given by another conversation partner who told the researcher that he or she could not give the best mode of learning. Fourth, one of the teachers said that he or she doesn't have the luxury of time to work for module or individualized activities for the hearing impaired students. These 4 responses were clustered into one group, and the researcher, or I, wrote a theme that talks about feeling inadequate, because these 2 clusters, like going extra mile and feeling inadequate, were the experiences by the teachers in general. After you group all these responses and cluster them into one theme, the next thing that the researcher would do will be clustering the units of meaning to form themes. After clustering, this is the time that we're going to formulate a central theme that will emerge from the qualitative study that we have. In my study, Inclusive Senior High School Classroom with Students with Hearing Impairment, 7 themes emerged, and these were rhetorically labeled, and each theme had been discussed comprehensively. After I already crafted the central themes for my qualitative study, I then made sure that each theme will be discussed comprehensively. Now, the next two slides will show you how I discussed some of the themes that I had for my study. So, the first theme that I had was feeling inadequate. It will never be easy for teachers who are new to the service and have never had any training for special education to communicate the needs of this differently abled group in a regular classroom setup. So I did an initial introduction first in discussing the theme, and then I quote some of the responses from the teachers that were my conversation partners. After inserting all the quotations coming from teacher conversation partners, I then gathered some literature that would back up the results from my study, saying that teachers who are actually assigned in an inclusive classroom have this feeling of inadequacy in themselves. One of the themes that emerged from the students with hearing impairment was this theme. I rhetorically labeled this as living a different world, because most of the students with hearing impairment, they feel so left behind by their hearing peers, because they couldn't be at par with the other regular students, and they open up about their struggle coping up with each of their lessons. And at the same time, there were stories of rejection and bullying from the students with hearing impaired. Right after, I also quote the responses from the interview and focus group discussion that I did. In order for me to make my analysis richer and substantial, I researched articles and studies coming from different sites and coming from different research studies also, in order to back up my claim. And one of the researches that I cite in this theme was from Mayer and Rose, which says that the learners who are in the margins, such as the learners who are gifted and talented or have disabilities, are particularly vulnerable, because in the interviews and focus group discussions that I had, there were a lot of stories, struggling stories. That was it about my qualitative research, specifically phenomenological in nature, and I hope you have learned something from this informative vlog. Thank you so much for watching.